What do these two fighter planes have in common? I'll give you a second. They both fought with machine guns. For the first 45 years of air combat, guns were the tool of choice. Of course, as aircraft got faster and flew higher, something had to change. Today, we'll go over the birth of the weapon that changed air combat forever, the Sidewinder missile. Let's rewind to World War II. Both the Axis and Allies were bombing the shit out of each other, and fighters were tasked with intercepting them as well as their own escort fighters. As it turns out, machine guns and cannons are a bit hard to kill other aircraft with. There are a lot of factors that go into hitting, let alone killing a straight-flying bomber. Not only do you need to line up for a gun solution, preferably from the rear, you have to take into account wind, g-forces affecting your fire grounds, and return fire from your target, and the list really goes on. The idea of a guided weapon was being tossed around during this time. The Germans were developing a wire-guided missile called the Röhrstahl X4. Using a remote control in the cockpit, the idea was for the pilot to fly the missile into the proximity of an Allied bomber, where it would detonate via a proximity fuse. This, of course, required the pilot of the fighter to fly straight and level whilst guiding the missile, which is a really dangerous thing to do while under fire. After the end of World War II, the US Navy decided it wanted a true fire-and-forget air-to-air missile that didn't require further pilot input after squeezing the trigger. In 1946, the Naval Ordnance Test Station, or NOTS, at Inyokern, California, began a project to develop a guided aerial rocket. The project, headed by William McLean, was initially dubbed Local Fuse Project 602, however by 1951, a more apt name was chosen: Sidewinder. The namesake is based upon the missile seeking system, which tracked heat sources in a similar manner to the Sidewinder, a North American rattlesnake that relies on heat-sensing organs to hunt warm-blooded prey. Throughout the 1950s, the prototype missiles were tested by both the US Navy at Inyokern, which was redubbed China Lake, and the US Air Force at Holloman Air Dev Center, with the first successful drone kill taking place on September 11, 1953. The US military knew it had a winner, and via subcontractors Raytheon, General Electric, and Philco Ford, the missile was put into operational use by 1956. Locking onto a target and shooting was a relatively simple process. The pilot of the fighter would point the infrared seeker at a target, and well, US Air Force ace Robin Olds describes it best.
The Sidewinder looks at the IR signature of an airplane, the heat waves, and it speaks to you. It kind of mumbles. Then if it sees a good heat source, it goes.
With a good growling tone in the pilot's headset, he would know to take a shot. Simple, effective, and relatively cheap. Of course, the missile had yet to see any combat. On the other side of the world in 1958, the Communist People's Republic of China and the Western-backed Republic of China, also known as Taiwan, were duking it out over the Taiwan Strait. The Taiwanese ROCAF was equipped with the American-built F-86 Sabre, while the PLAF had Soviet-built MiG-15s and MiG-17s. I won't get into the details of the conflict as this video would be over an hour long, but as always, I really do encourage you to research more on your end. Anyway, back to the Sabres and MiGs. The US Navy and Marine Corps wanted to have the ROCAF test the new Sidewinder in the field. Via the clandestine Operation Black Magic, 4 Sabres were modified to operate the AIM-9B, the first production variant of the Sidewinder. On September 24, 1958, a flight of 8 Sabres led by Leng Pei-Shu sortied, with half of the flight acting as high-altitude bait while the Sidewinder shooters hung out at lower altitude, ready to bust any MiGs that fell for the ruse. On that day, 4 MiG-15s were trapped. Taking the bait, 2 pairs of MiGs climbed at the high flight, giving the shooters a good view of their hot engines against the blue sky. At the end of the day, the Rocaf boys claimed 4 kills. The communists admitted to 2 losses themselves and 1 damaged aircraft. The Sidewinder had drawn blood, and the US military was pleased. For the next several years, fighter doctrine revolved around the reliance on missiles like the AIM-9. By 1965, when the US ended up in the Vietnam War, things would get a little bit more interesting. But that's going to require a whole video series of its own, which we'll get to sometime. Until then, support Hellion's Patreon if you're interested in the artwork shown in these videos, and you know what to do with the liking and subscribing. As always, I'm looking to learn too, so if I got something wrong or you disagree, let me know in the comments. I'd love to talk with you about it. Alright, keep the sun to your backs, guys. Have a good one. In 1946, the Naval Ordnance Test Section, or NOTS, at Annual